Hey, welcome back to the channel. This is Jared at 3C's Recreation, and today we are going to replace the hydraulic master cylinder on a Beta motorcycle. We brought this bike in used, and when I was playing with it in the parking lot, I thought it was kind of wobbly, and I was like, oh, something's got to be loose, but on the bottom of it, the master cylinder where it clamps to the handlebar is cracked, and I'll throw a still shot in there because it's on the bottom side, so it's hard to see. So that's okay. We brought this bike in to be our spare bike for the 24-hour race. That's going to be our race bike. It's less than 2 weeks away from the race, so we have a lot of work to do to that. But this is our new master cylinder. So any brand of bike that has a hydraulic clutch to it, you can use this. So this is where it's cracked in the bottom, is right here. And this is the new one. There's no fluid in this, obviously. It's still brand new. And this one came with a new crush washer and a new connector there. So this is what I'm going to replace with on this bike here. So first thing I want to do, if you want to come in a little bit here, you can see that our clutch line's got a pretty nasty angle right there. It's got a lot of pressure on it. And so what we want to do is we want to relieve some of that, because as soon as we crack this line loose, it's going to spring that. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take this kill switch, I'm going to loosen it up and just get it out of the way, and then I can slide this whole assembly farther outwards on the handlebar and relieve that angle. That way we're dealing with less stress, and it'll probably save our threads as well. So if you look in here, the threads that we're going for, the Betas anyway, have a nice little cover right there. And so we're going to unthread that from this nipple here. So like I said, the first thing I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to move my kill switch out of the way and slide this whole assembly down. So I went ahead and retightened the bolts down, holding the master cylinder completely flat, and then that way we can crack these loose. But before we do that, I like to protect the bike. So these graphics on this bike are right below where this fluid's going to come out from this assembly. And brake fluid is extremely bad for your graphics. So it'll actually eat them away. And so I'm going to protect the floor with one of our absorbent mats, and then I'm also going to find a way to kind of wrap this in here and protect the bike. We do this for all the customer bikes, but then all of our personal stuff as well. So we will hopefully get a way to make that stay there, and that way we're going to protect everything from any kind of fluid coming off of there. At this point, I try to keep the handlebars completely flat. I don't want to rotate them left or right, because that way this can stay flat. We're going to leave the cap on here. That way it helps hold the fluid. If I took this cap off, it would drain the fluid down and out as we open it. So we're going to try to keep all this fluid inside of this as we do it. So this one just happens to be an 11 and a 14. And we can loosen this nut and it'll spin on the brake line. So this part we're saving, but it does spin separately from here. That way you can loosen this. So we'll hold this part still. And we're just going to crack this loose. This one's coming apart pretty nice. This bike is not that old. So the goal with this is as soon as this comes loose, I want to tip this up to retain all that fluid inside of the clutch line. It's important, we don't want to hurt the threads on this because we have to reuse this part. The master cylinder portion is going to be probably saved as a spare, because it still actually holds to the bar pretty well, but it's not worthy of going to the race. So there we go. We pretty much saved all of our fluid inside of there. And as you can see, no fluid's really draining out of our top here, or out of our master cylinder, because there's no air coming in from the top. So I'm going to kind of hold that straight up and down. And this is where you can see, that's where it's broken right off the bottom there. That's where it was. And I'm going to tip this just straight up and down on the little rack here to keep it from draining. I'm going to get the rest of the assembly off the handlebar here. So now that everything's out of the way, I just want to clean the handlebar up a little bit. So I'm going to use a little bit of starting fluid on a rag here. I'm just going to rub it on here, get everything cleaned up and out of the way. That way it dries clean. We've got our new assembly to go right back up on the handlebar. And be careful when you're doing this. This jam nut, it was kind of like finger tight a second ago. There's not a lot of, it's pretty much just finger tight on here. So we want to tighten this one down on here. So we're going to mount it on the handlebar, and then we'll get it screwed back in, and then we'll get some fluid back in it. So I'm just going to snug this down just a little bit so it doesn't rotate on us. And I'm not setting it like for comfort as far as like where the lever is on the handlebar. I'm setting it so it's completely flat for now because we do have to open this up here in a second. So what we'll do now is we're going to carefully start this by hand. That way we don't hurt these threads. Just got to kind of wiggle it around a little bit, get everything to line up the way you want it. It's going in nice there. I can feel it going in. So now that it's started, we can kind of use our 11 millimeter here and just slowly work it into it. And before we tighten this down into this nipple, we're going to tighten this down into the master cylinder. So we're going to keep going here. So it's starting to, the threads are starting to bottom out here. So what I'm going to tighten this one down pretty good first. And you don't want to break this off. You just want to make sure it's tight. And this is a pretty simple thing that you can kind of monitor. So like if you're like, oh, how tight do I need to go with it? Maybe stop before you go too tight with it. And then you can monitor if it is leaking a little bit. And then we're going to tighten this one up against that. And again, we're not trying to crush these. And so what we'll do now is we're going to clean this with more starting fluid. We want to get all this, you can kind of see like some of the residue from a moment ago. That way we can keep this really clean and we can make sure it's not leaking. So now we have no brake fluid or clutch fluid, and hopefully we don't get any spilling out of the cap here. So the next step is understanding what kind of fluid needs to go back in your machine. So this one, it's really hard to read the cap because the phone won't focus on it, but it's either 4 or 5.1. It's got it describes it right on the top of the cap there. And so we have here at the shop, this is the Motul. I like to run the Motul stuff. It's worked really good for us. That's what we're going to put back in this bike. And because this is completely flat and the handlebars are straight, you want to take a really good Phillips screwdriver that really matches these bolts. You don't want to grab something that's too small because you end up stripping your cap nuts out, and that's not exciting. So I usually just kind of grab the screwdriver here and just kind of crack it open. Ta-da! So there's that. So completely dry, obviously. She was in the packaging. So what we're going to do is we're just going to throw a little bit. What's cool is the whole bottom of this clutch is still perfectly bled. We haven't messed with any of that yet. And even though I've got stuff on the bottom. Oh, so focus on the bottle real quick. If you come this way more. So I like to do 2 holes in it. I don't like to cut the whole thing out because this lets it pour better. And actually this bottom one, if I get that little thing out of the way there. So that way we have like a breather hole and then a pour hole. So if I just go like this, it should kind of control it a little bit better. And now the pressure is on because I said that. There we go. So we're not going to go too high with it. We're going to kind of keep it right there. And what I like to do is I just kind of like play with this, and you can kind of see. Can you see that bubble? Maybe come around to the other side there. There's bubbles underneath this little cap here, and you can see them coming out. You can see all those little bubbles coming out through there. And I'm just jiggling the lever at this point, and you'll kind of see them all start to come through. And there's going to be no pressure on this at this point. It's going to take a few minutes for me to bleed this. So I like to wiggle it back and forth. And we're just trying to get fluid to work because up to here is already bled. And so all of our air should just be right here in this section. And it takes a minute to get it to start to bleed. So what I'm starting to do is I'm starting to turn the handlebars a little bit because we want gravity to help us. So I'm rotating this a little bit. That way the line is going uphill. So just like a plumbing job here, we're just kind of rotating it, and then it's starting to, I can already start to feel it starting to build up a little bit. And it hasn't taken that much fluid yet, but I'm already starting to get a little bit of a clutch to it. You can really start to see the bubbles are coming because I'm starting to get pressure in the line. It's only taken like, oh yeah, the clutch is already there. So I'm just going to keep playing with it for a second. Actually, it's incredible how little fluid these things actually take in them. So we're just kind of vibrating it here. I would argue that it's like fully clutched again. I can feel the pressure against the plates in there. And we'll get some more little bubbles, as you can see, coming out now that I'm rotating it back flat again. But man, that took hardly any fluid to get this back to where I want it. Check that out. Here it comes. So at this point, we're really close. I'm gonna add more fluid in there because we don't wanna start pulling air back in. And we did lose our little wrapper there. So you don't wanna top this off completely because if you look underneath the cap here, it's got this, it's like a breather there. So, oh, our phones are ringing this morning. So if you top that completely up to the top, you're gonna put this on, you're gonna squish that fluid all over, but obviously we need to be above that white cap in there. So I'm gonna add a little bit more. It's like 8 o'clock on Friday this morning here. So I might have gone a little overboard there with the fluid. I don't think it's gonna take that much more. But yeah, we have a really good clutch feel already. So we've done videos on the channel on how to bleed your clutches on anything that's hydraulic or even like brake lines. But we don't need to do that on this because I didn't crack the bottom of it, and all of our work is right here on the top. So at this point, I'm going to put this cap back on. This is going to be our second bike, our practice bike. So what we're going to do is we'll monitor this over the next couple days, and we'll continue to fill it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put this cap on, and it's definitely going to squish out, even though I told you guys not to do that. So you want to put the cap back on so you can read the writing toward the rider. And it's kind of like cut out there in the corner, so it only really goes on one way. So I'm going to squish this on there. So actually, didn't really lose any fluid there. And we'll tighten these down. Again, use a good Phillips. There's no reason not to. If you can help it and not have a lot of fluid around it, it's going to help you know if anything is leaking or not. So we're just going to tighten these down. Again, you don't got to kill these. Just make sure they're tight. And the end of my screwdriver had a little bit, oh, my screwdriver had fluid on it because I stuck it in the end of the bottle to open that wrapper up more. So that's where that fluid's coming from. So at this point, it's going to be just purely up to each customer what they want to do. So we're good here. This is tight. I can slide my sleeve back up, kind of protect all that. And then at this point, it's just going to be up to the rider. You as a rider can decide how you want to do this. You can adjust your lever. I'm going to slide it back over, and I'm going to reattach our kill switch right where we want it for the race. So thank you guys for watching. This was Jared at 3C's Recreation. Enjoy the ride.